Today's guest is Garrett Salpeter, founder of NeuFit and creator of the Newbie device. Garrett's journey into neuroscience and recovery started after a hockey injury in college led him to functional neurology and direct current stimulation, an experience that completely changed the trajectory of his life and career. Today, NeuFit and Newbie devices are helping people improve recovery, movement, pain, performance, and nervous system function in a really groundbreaking way. This podcast is not medical advice. Talk to your clinician before changing training, meds, or supplements. Garrett, welcome to the show.
Eric, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on, and I love the work that you're doing. I think you're an inspiration, and you're leading by example here. So it's an honor to be here having this conversation with you.
Well, I appreciate having you here as well. And I want to hear about your story that led you to this insight of neurology and then this new direction into your career. So bring me back to college and hockey and what life looked like and what you were doing and how you experienced this directly.
Absolutely. Yes. Happy to do that. Ultimately, when I reflect back, I feel immense gratitude. One, for being able to find a way where I can channel my academic training and personal interest into a career. And then two, to really have this personal, profound pain to purpose experience. Oh, it's like a lot of P's: personal, profound, pain, purpose. Yeah,
exactly.
Never said that before. So I grew up playing ice hockey, ended up playing some in college, and I had injuries along the way where I was so disappointed with the traditional physical therapy, traditional orthopedic medicine. At one point, I thought about going pre-med, and just really based on my experiences there, decided that it wasn't for me. So I was in school. I was a physics major. I was set to become an engineer. I was in going to engineering graduate school. And my last year in college, I had another injury where I tore some ligaments, and I was told I likely would need surgery. And based on these previous experiences, I was just kind of down in the dumps thinking, oh yeah, I'm probably going to need surgery, right? And then I met, through a friend of a friend, I met a practitioner, originally a chiropractor, who was doing functional neurology, and he was using older versions of direct current, which is a unique type of electrical stimulation that's different because most of what's out there is alternating current. He was using this older analog device with a bunch of dials on it that had more like a microcurrent, but had direct current. And so this combination of working with functional neurology, working with the nervous system, looking at not just the injured tissues and ligaments, but looking at how the nervous system responds to that injury by shutting down some muscles and creating tension and bracing in others, and the way it has these global patterns of hypervigilance. Looking at that, addressing that, and then using these electric fields to influence the healing process. Long story short, it helped me recover without surgery. Ligaments healed on their own. And it was just such a revelation. I was relieved as an athlete, as a hockey player, but as a pre-engineering student, to find something that made sense scientifically from first principles. That was this eureka moment, this epiphany that was really inspiring, and ended up created a calling within me to share that type of work with as many people as I could. And that's what really sent me on this path. So as I was finishing my master's degree in engineering, I came down here for grad school at the University of Texas in Austin, which is how I got here. And I've been in Austin ever since for nearly 20 years. And in my grad school program, probably should have been in the laboratory, I was networking a little bit in the sports medicine world, connected with the guy who was the chiropractor for the UT Longhorns football team. And I ended up then in my early 20s, having just completed my master's degree in engineering, ended up actually renting a room from him, 120 square foot room, treating people under his license using older versions of electrical stimulation. And I just kept seeing amazing outcomes. I kept being inspired to learn more. I went back and did an additional graduate school program in neuroscience, and I kept seeing ways I wanted to improve the technology along the way. And where I was waiting for someone to come out with something better and just open more facilities, I finally got to the point over 7 or 8 years and all this experience, finally got to the point where, even though I didn't set out to start a medical device company, I realized that what I really had to do was create a device. And that was another 3 years or so of effort and prototype development, engineering, and compliance, and all this stuff that I'm glad I didn't necessarily know what it was going to be like going into it. I'm glad I had enough naivety to not know that.
That is the foundation of every great entrepreneur. Is you don't realize how difficult the journey is, because if you did, you'd never begin it.
That's right. There's a lot of truth in that. That's for sure.
Well, that's pretty incredible. So you had a lot of direct experience with patients early on. Are there any stories that kind of jump out at you as to when you kind of the light bulb went off and you're like, this is working in a way that other things aren't traditionally?
There's several moments along the way that jump out. Initially, I started off wanting to give people like me the tools, techniques, and strategies that I wished I had growing up. So that meant working with high school and college athletes, working with athletes that were like me, that had injuries or had difficulty reaching their full performance because they couldn't move their bodies in the right way, and unlocking the nervous system and neurological control made a huge difference for them. So that was really where I focused initially. And then because the work that we were doing was so nervous system forward, so neurologically focused, and as the business grew, there were some people who said, "Hey, could you help my friend with this?" Or, "Hey, could you help my mother with that?" And one of those first people from that neurological category who came in is a woman who had 25 years before fallen off a horse, broke her back, had a spinal cord injury, and was paralyzed from the waist down for
Oh, wow.
25 years. So a friend of a friend brought her in and asked, "Do you think you can help her?" And I said, "I don't know, but we'll try." And that was amazing because we started working with her, and initially we got a little bit of new sensations, enough to where in the first few sessions we started to think, hey, maybe this is worth trying. And so we worked with her and used direct current to create neurological input to tap into the power of neuroplasticity, which is going to be one of the themes that I imagine we will talk a lot about today. And in tapping into the power of neuroplasticity, we had her going through the stages of first getting autonomic function, like being able to sweat, for example, below the level of injury. She hadn't been able to sweat in her lower body, and getting more sensation there, and then getting some movement and function. And we took her through the process of essentially learning to walk again as an infant does or a toddler does, going through the process of crawling and rolling even before that, crawling, and then kneeling and walking, going through those progressions. And it was amazing to see. And there was this wonderful moment that was sort of the climax of the story where we'd been working with her. Granted, this was nearly 2 years at this point. It took a while to make progress. And she had arranged, it was around the holidays, and she had arranged a gathering of her family, a couple dozen people there, and arranged it so that everyone was at the restaurant. And she came in last, and she came in walking on a walker, and multiple
Amazing.
members had no idea. So people are just like beside themselves, and there's tears of joy, and there's all this screaming, and it was this amazing
Yeah, that
moment.
would certainly shape the direction that you choose to live your life in. I mean,
Yeah.
that's an impactful moment to have as a young entrepreneur and, validation that I would imagine you try to replicate it with everyone you work with because there seems to be no limit to what you can tap into.
Yes, absolutely. There's more to learn and things to improve, and the examples that we've seen of multiple people getting out of wheelchairs, regaining their autonomy, dramatically improving quality of life, making what feels like miraculous transformations. Seeing those, one, it makes all the struggles and challenges feel worthwhile, and two, it's incredibly inspiring to keep going and find ways to help more people and get this message out to more people.
Yeah, I never appreciated the comment when you hear someone who's had an impactful piece of technology or work when they say if it only helps one person, it's worth it. And you hear stories like that, and then you experience that directly where I'll get a thank you for what we've done with the podcast. And, it improved someone's life in some direction, gave them hope or agency to take control of what's affecting them. And it really does make you feel as if that's the only person that it happened for, the journey was worth it because, that has a ripple effect that we're unaware of, but it certainly carries out beyond the person whose life you impacted.
Yeah. And it's so interesting too that you might look at your podcast stats and see you get hundreds or thousands of downloads, and maybe the numbers look good. And to compare that to actually speaking with one person or hearing that direct narrative of how it's impacted them, at least to me, that often feels more impactful than seeing the number of devices that are out there or seeing numbers of how many treatments have been done or whatever the metric might be.
No, completely agree. So, a technology question that I'm kind of curious about, and I have no expertise in this field, but the word fascia seems to come up so much that is there a direct impact from direct current on fascia, or is it more neuromuscular and we're kind of separating that out?
That is a very good question. So the fascial system is essentially the tissue that encapsulates and envelops all of the organs of the body, including muscle. And there's been this interesting movement where a lot of times the fascial system was essentially ignored, because when medical students are doing their looking at corpses and going through and looking at the body, they essentially cut through the fascia and discard it in order to see the quote unquote important tissues underneath. And there's been a lot of work in the past couple of decades to show how important that enveloping tissue actually is, about how it's innervated, about how important it is structurally for movement, for clearing lymph, for circulation, for all these things. So I think it's impossible to affect the neuromuscular system without impacting the fascial system as well. And I am confident that we're affecting it. I think there's some emerging work showing just how neurologically dense and how electrically sensitive and electrically active that tissue is. And so I think there are ways that we're affecting it that at least I don't fully understand yet. So, for example, one thing that we do as part of the NeuFit method is we will often scan around on the body with this direct current signal to identify where the nervous system is guarding or inhibiting and limiting and protecting the body, and stimulate those areas to accelerate the process of what's called neuromuscular reeducation, to attempt to restore neuromuscular function in that area. And I do think that part of what we're picking up could be some sort of electrical disruption related to perhaps scar tissue or inflammatory cells that are electrically charged that are in certain layers of the fascia. So I do think there's something there. I don't want to overstate it because I don't necessarily have the specific evidence on that yet, but there is an exciting body of research that is very robust on the importance of that tissue and on the electrical nature of it. So I think there's definitely something there, and it is an area for further exploration. I know we're affecting it, at least in some ways.
Yeah, it seems like it would be impossible not to, but to your eloquent summary there, it seems to not get as much credit as it deserves or traditionally deserved in impacting stability and muscular movement, and maybe is actually what's causing more of the problem than the brain muscle connection, because it seems to be an autonomic system, the way fascia relates to stability and movement in the body.
And if I may also, there's a slight tangent alert here. There's a fabulous book that was very influential on me in the years leading up to creating the NeuFit device and methodology, and even still that we talk about and think about as a team and in our greater community of practitioners. There's a book called The Body Electric that came out, I want to say in the late 80s, approximately that time, back in the 1900s, right? And
Right.
and it talks a lot about the perineural system, which is part of the fascia. It's basically the scaffolding around nerves. So we often conceptualize nerves as these cable-like structures that send action potentials. That's more of a binary, discrete, on-off signal being sent type of communication pathway. And then around that is this scaffolding called the perineural system, which is part of the fascial system. And that has slower varying, more analog than digital electric fields that influence, that sort of bias the ability to send electrical information through what we think of as the nervous system, and also creates these electric fields that influence things like sleep and wakefulness and alertness, and influence
Wow.
the healing process. And these electric fields are super relevant in the healing process after injury. because that's actually what signals the body to send inflammatory cells there to clear out the debris, to kind of chew up and clear out damage from tissue, and then to call the next phase of cells in to start rebuilding and repairing. And it's very relevant. So those are things that, of course, using electricity, I believe we are impacting, at least in some way. And it was a fascinating description of one of the ways that this system is vitally important for health and some of these underlying processes that we sometimes take for granted and that we also still don't always even fully understand scientifically. It's amazing how the more you learn, the more you realize there's still so much left to learn, and still so many things that are seemingly miraculous and amazing and so complex.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's not necessarily a new concept. I mean, Tesla talked about if we look into healing, we need to look at frequency. And, this has been a concept that's been out there for quite a while. I don't think anyone has been able to fully encapsulate it in a 30-second elevator pitch, but there definitely is a history of looking at the body as an electrical system and dialing in to whatever frequency heals the best. And so you seem to be tapped into that, whether it was intentionally or not. It seems as if it's a part of your story as well.
It certainly is. And it's interesting because we have a lot of well-established protocols that work in physical therapy, in sports medicine and orthopedic, and then also in neurological settings, neurodegenerative conditions. And as I think about what's ahead and what more can we do, this is one of the areas that I keep coming back to in terms of thinking that there are ways to tap into in more powerful ways these underlying processes in the body that are guided by electric fields. I think we may have seen some glimpses of it in a recent study we did on diabetic peripheral neuropathy, where we saw some healing and regenerative changes in peripheral nerves, which was exciting. And it's one of those things that I definitely keep coming back to. It's one of the, I'd say, fundamental or foundational pieces for me in my understanding of this field and some of the potential directions of where it can evolve.
So, how important is the brain body connection? Is it something that you guys think about directly, or is it more it's an autonomic system that we're working with? I mean, it seems as if you're tapping it on every level you can.
I I think about that on a daily or perhaps hourly or minute by minute basis, the brain body connection. I think that is really everything. And of course, you listening to this likely know that the brain sends signals down to control the body. One part of the brain body connection that I think is perhaps not as well understood or overlooked is the opposite direction, is how much movement of the body actually affects the brain. There's all these studies, for example, that show how exercise in the body can impact the brain's ability to learn and can affect the psychology. And exercise can release naturally chemicals within the brain that can be as effective as anti-anxiety or antidepressant medications. So we can be our own pharmacy, and the body has a profound impact. I also, on this topic, one of the things that I like to think about as a thought experiment is to imagine you wake up on a pleasant morning, you hear birds chirping, everything seems like it should be good, and your brain is coming online and taking inventory, and it's thinking, okay, this is good, that's good. And then all of a sudden, it gets a signal from the body of tension in the diaphragm, not because of
Right.
anything that happened that morning, just because you're already carrying that. So the brain's going through, taking inventory, good, good, good. It sees that and says, oh, there must be something happening. And so even though nothing is really happening in the immediate environment, the brain sees that signal from the body and thinks, oh, there must be some reason to be hypervigilant or tense. And that can actually create a baseline level of stress just launching into a day that otherwise shouldn't or wouldn't necessarily have to be there.
Yeah, if I can't get my gratitude kind of straightened out while I'm still in bed and, I go through an exercise of what am I thankful for and what I want my day to look like and kind of project out that imagery as early as possible. If I can't get that going, it seems to move sideways until I get that orientated. So any sort of tightness, or last night I had some neck discomfort, which my wife never refers to as neck discomfort. She refers to it as central nervous system disorder, because it's, the neck is the conduit from the brain to the body. And it's definitely something that I'm conscious of when it's not working. I love the analogy of waking up to the birds and everything that's kind of right in life, and just trying to build off of that. But there's definitely those hurdles, and particularly with Parkinson's, you never know what symptoms are going to pop up. You're going to deal with stiffness trying to get out of bed. Do you have leg cramps? Are you moving slowly? Do you have brain fog? There's a host of common experiences that people seem to, on any given day, seem to have to interact with as a result of the Parkinson's. But if you can get your frame of mind in order and kind of do a checklist on the rest of your body, it certainly gives you an inventory of what's working and what's not working, and you can go about and take agency and do something proactive to, whether it's exercise or stretching or hydration or some sort of activity to kind of offset the direct result of the symptomology. Have you worked with people with MS or dementia or the more common brain neuro problems?
We've worked with people who have certainly MS, some dementia, Parkinson's also. We have, in terms of published studies, our most robust is the one I alluded to earlier on peripheral neuropathy. And that, of course, is a different mechanism, different type of injury. And we saw some really powerful improvements in nervous system function and perhaps even healing and structure, because we saw increased EMG amplitude, increased electrical activity, and nerve conduction velocity. So it indicates there may be some sort of healing process happening as well. And some of those mechanisms translate across diagnoses as well. We have a published case series on functional recovery in MS patients, looking at increased in timed up and go testing and muscle strength and reduced spasticity and walking speeds and things like that. So the disability scores reducing, meaning reduced disability. So that very, very promising. They've done a lot of work. There's several similar stories of MS patients. Like I talked about this woman who had the spinal cord injury who was able to start using a walker and had an incredible recovery. We have some stories of MS patients that are just incredible. There's a woman that came down to see us in Austin, Texas, came all the way down from Wisconsin for an initial intensive for a week. And she started to make a little bit of progress. So she rented a machine, kept working. And one of the things that she told us when she was here was that her stretch goal was to be able to walk her son down the aisle at his wedding that was scheduled to be about 1.5 years in the future. And she was able to do that. And seeing the video of that was just so moving, was so
Well, it's the
wonderful.
power of motivation is certainly a something that keeps you grinding away at it. So it's a powerful motivator.
Yeah. And then that same woman also was able to get out of a wheelchair, walk her son down the aisle. She was able to get her driver's license back. She had lost her
Wow.
driver's license because of the level of disability. And she gave up having a caregiver at her house. She had to have a caregiver at home. So she was able to regain her autonomy, quality of life. Really, really profound.
That's amazing. For those that are unfamiliar, what's peripheral neuropathy?
So neuropathy, it's the pathy is pathology, meaning something wrong with the nerve. So neuropathy. And peripheral means out in the limbs, away from the spinal cord. So it is most commonly experienced in the feet. Next most common might be in the hands. It could be anywhere in the limbs. And one common mechanism, certainly not the only one, it can come from injury, from chemotherapy treatments. The most common mechanism of neuropathy is diabetes, so diabetic peripheral neuropathy, where because of all the damage to blood vessels caused by excess blood sugar, it reduces the blood flow to peripheral nerves, and that happens most in the smallest blood vessels out in the hands and feet. And when the nerves don't get blood flow, they don't get nutrients, and they eventually start to atrophy and wither and perhaps even die at some point. So with that study, we were able to stimulate the feet of these patients and help them increase sensation, increase strength, increase their ability to perform activities of daily living, and actually see measured electrical changes in the nerves there. So that was really exciting. Part of why that was exciting is that it was the first study in humans comparing head to head alternating current, that traditional type of electrical technology, versus direct current, this other type that we've been talking about a little bit today.
So how many practitioners do you have, or how many devices do you seem to have out in the marketplace at this point?
There's at the time we're having this conversation, somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 practitioners certified, most of whom are here in the United States. There's some in other countries in the UK and Europe and Australia. Most of them are here so far, and many of them are in physical therapy clinics and some chiropractic offices, some other types of facilities. Some of those are athletic trainers and professional sports teams who don't work with the general public. So there's, across all of those, there's 500 something locations as of this conversation across the US that are offering NeuFit treatments. And it's amazing on the one hand to see the progress. And it's also very inspiring and humbling to know that there's so many more thousands and thousands of facilities out there who would dramatically benefit from this and don't have it yet. And so it's part of our job again to get the word out.
And so what's next for you guys?
For us, there's several things that we're excited about. We are doing some research studies. I'd love to do something on Parkinson's. We actually do have an initial early pilot study that I forgot to mention earlier, which was done in the Phoenix area in combination with Tufts University Physical Therapy Program and a local college that has a PTA, Physical Therapy Assistant Program, where they actually looked at the effect of NeuFit treatments on sleep quality in Parkinson's patients. Because as you know, Eric, and as you listening may have experienced with Parkinson's, one of the issues can be sleep disruption or sleep fragmentation. And of course, sleep is so important for recovery, restoration, overall health, so many things about our health and quality of life. And they were able to see some improvements in sleep quantity and quality, which was good. A very early pilot just looked at that narrow area, but something there. So for us,
It's timely. I'm going to be doing a sleep test in about 3 days
great.
to address some of those issues. And I think one that you mentioned earlier, not directly, but you alluded to, autophagy, and the body's ability to clean up damaged cells and misfolded proteins and stuff. And that seems to be a state of sleep and fasting seem to be the most proactive ways to create that environment, so you can kind of clean the garbage out of your brain and out of your blood and restore some recovery.
Absolutely. That's one of the top. Of course, there's many reasons why sleep is important. That is one of the top, is the autophagy and the glymphatic system that, as you said, Eric, cleans out the debris that has accumulated in the brain, metabolic byproducts and such. That is, yeah, vitally important. And, you know, in terms of what's on the roadmap for us, certainly studies, attempting to find some ways to innovate on features and new things within our product line, and then a few things getting into some new markets internationally. It's definitely something that we're working on as well. So it's an exciting time. We're also upgrading our whole education system, the way that we deliver content to practitioners and individuals who have their devices. So we've got a lot going on.
Well, I certainly encourage the research into the Parkinson's element of it. Just to, my own selfish satisfaction would be served if you guys begin a program to address Parkinson's. But
Yeah,
there's definitely, you're in the right area. Phoenix is a hotbed for Parkinson's with the Muhammad Ali Institute down there, and the World Conference taking place this year in Phoenix as well.
that's right. Yes. Have you ever interacted with Linda Denny? She's a physical therapist and a PhD.
I don't know her directly, no.
Okay. So she was one of the professors who led this pilot study that I talked about using NeuFit to help with sleep in Parkinson's patients. And she is a professor, researcher, and a clinician, brilliant woman. And she is going to be actually presenting. I think she's presenting the poster on that study at the Parkinson's conference in Phoenix that you just talked about.
Well, fantastic.
Yeah.
It would be great to, yeah, it'd be great to see that. And unfortunately, it's 2 days after my ablation, so I'm gonna be bedridden, unfortunately. I won't be able to attend this year, but it's something that I'll stay on top of as much as possible. I'm on the board of Rocksteady Boxing, and so they'll have a presence there, and hopefully we can, look forward to seeing what you guys are working on.
Awesome. I love it.
So you mentioned neuroplasty before and your device and its impact on neuroplasticity. You want to expand on that at all, or?
I'd love to. It's one of my favorite topics. How much
Okay,
time?
well, I'm gonna let you run with that one as much as you want, and maybe there'll be a follow-up question, but take it away.
I'll try to do the 5-minute version. So neuroplasticity simply describes the ability of our brains and nervous systems to adapt to the input of our environment. So what is input of the environment? Well, one example is, imagine you grow up here in the United States, hearing English or perhaps Spanish, and you naturally adapt to hearing the phonetics, the sounds of those languages, and you then learn to speak those languages and those sounds, and contrast that to a baby who grows up in mainland China and they hear Mandarin or Cantonese being spoken, and it's a whole different set of phonetics, a whole different set of sounds. And so they grow up hearing and then learning to speak that language, and it's difficult for us to speak their language when we hear someone of Chinese descent who's a native Chinese speaker try to speak English. They sometimes can't even make certain sounds in the English language because they've adapted to the environment that they're in. And the same thing happens to us. For example, if I sit at a desk 8 hours a day in this hunched over position, guess what? I'm adapting. I'm getting better at being in that position. When I get up from the desk, I've earned the right to be in that hunched over position all day long. So we're always adapting to whatever we're doing, and neuroplasticity is just the capacity to adapt. It's neither good nor bad. It's neutral. It's the capacity to adapt in either a desired direction or an undesirable direction.
So habits are an example of neuroplasticity, right?
Yeah, habits are an example of neuroplasticity, especially if you have the experience of attempting to start a new habit where it takes effort initially, and then once you do it regularly enough, it becomes ingrained literally in the synaptic connections and the structure of the brain, and it takes a lot less energy. It's like if you're walking a path through a grassy field and there's just a bunch of grass there, but then you walk over the same path over and over and over and over again, eventually there forms a trail there where it's a lot easier to move through there. There's less resistance. That's the same sort of thing that happens. So that's the broad concept. Now, when we're talking about how do we actually harness the power of neuroplasticity to potentially help someone with Parkinson's or MS or some sort of neurodegenerative condition, well, the idea is that we'd want to leverage neuroplasticity to stimulate the body either to repair damaged neurological pathways or potentially build a detour and use other pathways to compensate for ones that are damaged or degenerated or deficient. And how do we create that, either that healing or that detour? Well, you have to put enough input, enough stimulation into the system so that the brain and nervous system actually get the memo. They actually get the point that these pathways are important enough, are being used frequently enough, that it's actually worth the energy and resources, worth investing that to rebuild these and then to maintain them, because it takes energy to build nerve tissue and maintain nerve pathways. It takes energy to build muscle. It takes energy, if the muscle is a good scenario because the same type of dynamic is there. If someone is injured and is bedridden for a couple of days, their muscles will atrophy because our bodies want to conserve energy, right? There could be a famine tomorrow from our evolutionary biology. There could be a famine tomorrow. So if we're not using this structure, the body wants to break it down and not have to spend the energy and resources to use it and maintain it. So we have to use this frequently enough, regularly enough to help the body understand that it's necessary. And so there's some amount of work that has to be done just to maintain function. And then there's an additional amount of work on top of that that has to be done to reach that threshold to stimulate the body to improve, to tap into that capacity for neuroplasticity, which for some people might mean a little bit improvement over a long time. For some people, it might mean a lot of improvement relatively quickly. We don't necessarily know until we begin the process with somebody. The key, however, is to create enough input and then to make sure that the body is healthy enough, the underlying systems are robust enough, the metabolic system is healthy enough to be able to take in raw materials, to get protein building blocks and energy and rebuild and repair and send those to these desired areas. The body has to be able to have enough proficiency to have enough energy and resources to take care of the minimum necessary for survival, and then have a bit of a surplus left over to go into building these new structures. So you have to create the input. You have to have enough of these supporting resources, and you have to be in that state for a long period of time. And so where, for example, technology like ours comes in is that in order to reach that threshold to create enough input, that can mean literally treating yourself like an athlete. That can mean not just an hour of therapy a few times a week, but multiple hours per day of targeted work, day in and day out. It's like being an athlete. And that can be very difficult to do for a variety of reasons that you can imagine. And so using technology like this that increases the amount of input can allow you, the numbers won't be exact, but it can allow you for every rep that you do to get the equivalent input of 3 or 4 or 5 reps. That's the idea. Again, the number is not going to be the same for everybody, but the idea is that you can get more input so you can reach that critical mass, that critical threshold faster. So I like to think about getting enough input there to drive neuroplasticity. I like to think about it as if you're driving from Los Angeles to New York. If you're going across the country, there's a finite amount of distance you have to cover, just like there's an amount of work that you have to do in this scenario. The question is, how are you going to do that work, or how are you going to cover the distance? You could walk or ride a horse across the country. You could drive a car, or you can take an airplane. So there's kind of the manual approach of just doing extra hours and hours and hours of work, which is sort of like driving across country, or there's using technology. You still have to cover the same distance, but you can just do it faster, more efficiently. And there's certainly some advantages to being able to do that.
So do you guys see yourself more as a recovery tool or more as an activation tool, or is it kind of, it's in the hands of the practitioner to decide what they're working on?
It's really all of the above, because the nervous system is so relevant, whether you're an athlete recovering from a sprained ankle or an ACL surgery, or whether you're someone dealing with chronic pain, or whether you're someone dealing with functional deficits because of Parkinson's or MS. The nervous system is relevant throughout all of that. If you're trying to activate your muscles so you can have better balance and go walk, or before you go out and play in a game in the National Football League, activating your muscles before you do that, it's all relevant. The same principles all apply. I think that if you have a body, you're an athlete, and working with the nervous system is vitally important. Everyone's working with the nervous system, whether they realize it or not. It's just a question, how are you affecting the nervous system?
Do you guys have direct effect on the vagus nerve, or is that something that just kind of gets thrown in or affected indirectly through the work that you're doing on the rehab?
That's a great question there. We do have a specific protocol that we call our master reset, or autonomic nervous system reset. And as certainly Eric, as you listening likely know, there's the sympathetic side of the nervous system, the fight or flight stress, where you're using adrenaline and cortisol to mobilize energy and meet immediate challenges. And then there's the parasympathetic, the rest and digest, where the body's in a more restful, restorative state, and it can devote energy to longer term growth and repair processes like digestion, like rebuilding muscle, like neuroplasticity and these adaptations that we were talking about, most of which happen during sleep. Again, why sleep is important. So all that to say that stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system can be, for virtually everybody, very powerful and valuable and important. And we do have this protocol that is, we can call it our version of a vagus nerve reset. It seems to be doing even more than just the vagus nerve, because there's other parts to the parasympathetic nervous system, other areas that are being stimulated as well. We do a whole body stimulation that we also sometimes call our electric meditation, where we have this direct current flowing from the back of the neck, base of the cranium, down to the feet, or down to the lower back, where there's another parasympathetic bundle of nerves there. And we've seen we've done some testing where if you lie down and do diaphragmatic breathing, or you get acupuncture, all of these things will increase your heart rate variability. And if we do the master reset, we see that it increases heart rate variability 2 or 3 or 4 times more than those other things. So it's really
That's
powerful.
remarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, the HRV, unfortunately, my HRV score is skewed because of my tremor and my Parkinson's and my AFib. So I'm not sure which one's affecting it the most, but I went from having a score of like 20 something or 30, which wasn't particularly high because of Parkinson's and not being able to turn on my parasympathetic nervous system as well as I could, through breath work and stuff like that. But I put on my Zoom. Deb got me a new whoop for the holidays, and I put it on exactly. And sure enough, it's showing that my recovery, my HRV, is like 150. And I'm like, it can't possibly be 150 because it'd be the healthiest person in the world, and I'd feel amazing. But I realized that it was taking all of my AFib numbers and calculating them as if I was actually working out. And so my, 60 minutes at 225 was, registering as if it was a exercise induced, elevated heart rate. And then my resting heart rate would drop down to something like 70, which isn't particularly low for someone who's as fit as I've been. But it was low enough from what the highs were that the variability was scoring me like off the charts. So I
That's
have a
fast.
great HRV score. It's kind of like having a super low body fat score, but because you haven't had food as opposed to, a structured diet or, you know where I'm going with that. So
Yeah, sure.
it's kind of interesting. So what gives you hope in what you guys are doing now? What seems to be the most promising avenue that you're focusing your energies on?
Well, gosh, I think I I feel lot of hope and inspiration from really all the things we've talked about, from working with, of course, as I said, I think everyone's an athlete, and I'll say from working with athletes in air quotes, in high school, college, and pro sports, to working with neurodegenerative patients who are dealing with the conditions like we're talking about here today. So I think it's all hopeful. The neuropathy study was especially an example of that, in large part because the situation to me is just so sad, where there's 1 in 10 people. So in the United States alone, that's over 30 million people have a form of neuropathy.
It's
And
amazing.
yeah, and the current standard of care is just pain management. There's no one really believes that you can help these individuals improve function, heal in any meaningful way. And so to have a breakthrough like this study that we put out last year, I think is really exciting. And I'm hopeful, in working with Linda Denny, this professor I mentioned earlier, I'm hopeful that we can start to see some path to have similar breakthroughs in the realm of Parkinson's. Obviously,
Does essential tremor qualify as a neuropathy?
it certainly wouldn't be a peripheral neuropathy. It would be more central, typically coming from the brain. We've seen some, still in the realm of case study, we've seen some people reduce and smooth out tremors. And then we've seen some that, unfortunately, we haven't been able to help as much. So I do think this type of work is worth trying. And that's one of the areas for research, is for us to figure out how we can more consistently and significantly impact those types of symptoms and presentations.
There's a difference between a Rafe machine and a newbie. They're both dealing with frequency, but do you know essentially what the difference is, or is there some commonality and some overlay?
The Rife machine, as I understand it, is more of like a magnetic field, where it's putting energy in. So there's a lot of overlap between ours is more electric, that's more magnetic. Whenever you have an electric field in physics, you have a magnetic field at a right angle. So whenever a magnetic field is applied to the body, it's going to cause electrical charges to move, just the same as when you apply an electric field to the body, it's going to cause electrical charges to move. So there's overlap. It's a different mechanism of delivery, but there's more overlap. That is going to be more focused on creating resonance with certain frequencies, which we can do with our machine, but it's going to be more focused on different types of conditions, where we're going to be more focused on precise neuromuscular function and movement and coordination. And the two can actually work in a complementary fashion. So you could use both together.
I got a question for you. You work with both recovery and performance. Do you think these worlds are more connected than people realize?
But yes, I think if you walked into a facility and you saw good performance training, good training for athletes and good physical therapy and rehabilitation, you might not be able to tell the difference, because in both you're trying to restore proper movement patterns. You're trying to stimulate the body to load certain tissues so that they become stronger during the subsequent recovery period. You're trying to challenge specific energy systems. There's so much overlap. In rehab, you're trying to work specifically to bring up a weak link. And then in performance, you're trying to, once the weak links are balanced out, then you're trying to increase the functional capacity of the whole system in a more rotating through different traits and qualities, more of a rotating manner. So I think there's so much overlap. So many of the goals really are the same, and you may just be starting at a different place, but it's the same path.
So where do you see this going in the next 5 to 10 years?
I certainly hope and intend to see hundreds or perhaps thousands more clinics offering this. And then we'd also like to have options for patients of those clinics to be able to have home units that they can rent or buy from the clinic and continue their care at home to make things more convenient, more accessible. This has done so much for me, even in my own life, using it for mobility and activation, using it for recovery and using it for training. There's so many things that I can do with it that have helped me tremendously in my own health and performance and preparation for other activities. And there's so many things that I feel I get out of bed excited every day to share with other people.
Well, it's super exciting. I agree. The overlap between recovery and performance are different sides of the same coin. It's exciting to see that you guys are tapped into this and where you're going and what you're doing and the impact you're having on certain communities, certainly the people that are working with you. It's great, and I appreciate you sharing your story and your journey, and look forward to seeing what you guys actually are doing over the next years. And I owe you a follow-up as soon as I get my condition dealt with, my ablation dealt with. I'll be coming in and trying out your device. And
Fabulous. I look forward to all of that.
awesome. Well, thank you for the great work, and look forward to hearing and catching up as soon as possible.
Likewise. Thank you, Eric.
If this episode helped, share it with a coach, an athlete, or someone who needs a little momentum.
And if you have a topic you want us to tackle, send it in. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks for listening. Catch you on the next one.